That joke isn't funny anymore. Available on Amazon and everywhere. Hey guys, welcome back to the Lou Perez podcast. I'm your host, Lou Perez, and I am joined for the second time by one of my favorite guests ever. That's why I asked him to come back. Please give it up, the live audience here, for Steve Faktor, everybody.
Thank you. It's really an honor when you get invited back. That's like getting a second date. It's a big thing.
And I promised him the first time around. I was like, "Look, if you're really good, I'll pay you for the next time." But it turns out he wasn't that good to get paid. So on the third time, if he comes back a third time, we'll discuss some more money.
Am I getting paid in beads? What is the currency?
Whatever land you're indigenous to, I will gladly pay beads for it. I just want to point out for those of you who are watching, you might notice that there's like a technical issue here. Steve is very vertical right now, and there is like a border on both sides of his image, which I think is just his way of trying to separate himself even more. He's like, I'm going to be associated with this podcast, but I want this line of separation just a little bit.
I have a great vertical, like baby LeBron. That is my thing.
Thank you, baby LeBron, for coming on. And Steve was I don't know if you were worried. You're like, what are we going to talk about? We might have to just like wing it. And I think out of all the people that I know, you're definitely one of those guys that I enjoy winging it with, because I think you're a font of information and advice. And
a font?
Font?
Is that a sexual position? A font?
I think it's a font, like a fountain, isn't it? Like a font.
I didn't think she would do the font on the first date, but
Yeah, that's it's like a fupa kind of. A font is that the
thing that Jewish people get married under, the fupa?
the fupa. That would be, oh man. Now I'm imagining like some like I'm imagining some like R. Crumb type comics with like a huge woman with like a big fupa, and then underneath the Jewish couples getting married. But yeah, since we are going to wing it, I did have a number of things that I wanted to talk to you about. I think one of the things I probably want to start with is the last time we saw each other was in real life, which is interesting, because I'm so used to most of the people I get to talk to. It's just, this is the way for me to talk to them, like as a parent, kind of living, outside of the city. This is my opportunity to talk to adults and anybody with children. One of the things that I think has surprised me the most is the amount of explanation I need to give to my kids about everything, especially for them not to do something, like don't do this, and here's the reason why. And some of it I thought, because I'm an adult, isn't it just obvious that you shouldn't, you shouldn't be jumping around with your brother with a fake sword in your hand because one of you can get, poked in the eye. Isn't that just obvious? And that level of explanation, it can be so tiring, because I found that I don't necessarily have the words for it sometimes. Like I'm trying to, Well,
it's become innate to you, but it's remedial to them.
Yeah. And, I wonder how much of that extends to adults who, I wonder if like a lot of like this, like me doing this podcast is a way for me to just practice speaking, like just making sure that I'm able to
going in
communicate.
A different direction. I thought
we could go there. It's probably wherever you thought I was going is probably better.
Because where I thought you were going is something that I've also thought about in the past, which is the idea that, we don't have perfect learning over generations. Like, for example, in corporate, a big thing for a while, especially like when the internet first started, was knowledge management, because you had all these offices in different places, you had all these teams, you had turnover, people leaving the company. So that knowledge is lost, right? And that's why Salesforce became such a huge company, because they allowed the company to take control of the sales relationships away from the salespeople. essentially because they would go out, they would have all their notes, they would have all of the, information about the client. And then some of them would just take the clients with them when they went to a different company. And that same sort of knowledge management. So there's relationship part of it. And then there's a knowledge management part of it that also was, kind of just floated away when someone left the company who knew a lot of stuff about certain types of clients, certain types of industries or projects. And so that is happening on a societal level. We don't have because the education system is supposed to be that, which is this knowledge transfer, the wisdom of generations being passed on to that next generation. And it almost becomes innate to that next generation, but it's not. And what's happening now, and I'm feeling it now, and part of it is aging and part of it is the reality of it, which is you start to see how much relearning is actually necessary. Like all the things that we took for granted growing up, like communism doesn't work. Socialism doesn't work. Like I just saw an article from Duke University, which is a legitimate university, talking about why Black people should give up on property rights, as if someone conceived of some magical cabal, this do-gooder cabal that can divvy up land use or property use in a more equitable way than just saving up and buying it and owning it and protecting it. So this idea, which I took for granted for a very long time, I'm seeing being challenged and re-challenged by a whole new generation of people who that knowledge never transferred over to them. So it's kind of a slightly more macro view of what you just talked about, which is, like the things you took for granted, you now have to explain to your kids and break them down almost in a way that you never even thought you had to, because you never conceptualized it. You just internalized it.
Yeah. And I think that was a recent tweet that you had in regards to that article, because one of the things, it's really interesting that one of the things you hear a lot is when it comes to voting, like ultimately if you have money you own the government or whatever, and it's like, okay, so make people wealthy. Like wouldn't that be a great idea? Like you could have but you could get possibly more more of a say if you're wealthy, or maybe that's not too good of an example. But or the example, I think probably the bigger example is like intergenerational wealth, right? And it's like that's often accumulated in the form of property. Like grandpa dies, he leaves his house to his either his kids or his grandkids, and it's like off of that you're able to to get equity and to to build off of that. So if you want to create intergenerational wealth, there has to be a really solid understanding of what property rights are. And I remember years back reading about this initiative in South America. I forget which country it was exactly, but one of the things that they did was there were all these native populations, these indigenous people there, and they didn't own any land. So what they ended up doing is the government started cutting up like sort of these, like a hectare or acreage of land and saying, here you go, here's the deed, you now own this. And, suddenly, here, after, hundreds of thousands of years of not owning this, these people now had the ability to, move on beyond, kind of a hunter-gatherer, situation, and finally into the, at the time, the 20th century.
Yeah, and that's really the best argument for property ownership. I'm not saying that there are very successful countries in Europe that have very, very high levels of community and quality of life where the majority of people are renters. So it's nothing against them. It can be done that way as well. But the biggest argument for property ownership is vestment. It's the difference between how you treat a rental car versus how you treat your own car, and so that is the way that people are. So you give them dominion over their own property, and now they will treat it differently. They will treat the neighborhood differently. They will treat the community differently. And even in my own recent example, we just moved to Austin. And we took a pit stop in the suburbs of New Jersey for a while during the pandemic.
Don't you laugh at me. Don't you laugh
no,
at me,
no.
sir.
That wasn't meant as a slight. It was just, we overstayed our welcome because it was great during the pandemic. The parks were great. The nature was great. There's a lot of perks, in terms of space. But we miss being in a city, not necessarily the city, New York City. But the thing about New York, I would say that in the decades that I lived there, both by myself and with my parents, I had no close relationships with any of my neighbors, then moved for a few years to the suburbs of New Jersey, and all of a sudden knew all my neighbors. We were doing each other favors, borrowing stuff from each other. People were looking out for each other. Completely different vibe. It was like landing on another planet. And people nodded hello to you on the street. And I still took that in with me here, and no one gives a flying fuck about anybody here because we're back to city life. Even though it's not New York, it's still a bunch of strangers with no investment in this particular community where we're in, because we just moved temporarily to kind of establish a home base, and then we'll see how it goes from there. But that is a huge difference, because those people are looking out for their property values, for the safety of their kids, maybe for dog sitting or something else, that makes sense. And we've had neighbors step in, like when our train was delayed and the dog needed to be walked, they could pick up the key and we trusted them to open our door. Who are we going to do that with here? Nobody. And so just that alone creates, and I've lived through it personally, and you see the difference. It's stark. And having that sense of ownership usurps any kind of benevolent top-down distributions that communists or socialists have tried to conceive.
So when you started talking about your relationship with the neighbors, I was going to contradict you because I've been in this town for like 3 years. I don't know anybody. I don't know any of my neighbors. I don't know their names.
Because you're a shut-in who wears a winter hat in the summer. Of course, they're going to look at you.
Let me explain it.
This guy's got bodies buried in his house.
I wear a winter hat because I keep my home very cold. I'm such a moron. I keep my home so cold that it's uncomfortable not to have a winter hat and a sweater on inside. So fair enough. You're dealing with that. But like I said, I was going to contradict you, but then I remembered, my wife is the one who knows all the neighbors. She knows their names. She does events and projects and all that. So it's really important to have at least one person in the,
I was the wife is what you're saying.
It's really important for Steve to be your wife.
I'm reading between the lines here, and I see where you're going with this. And I'm not going to let this affect my transition plans. Let me just tell you.
But on the importance that, like, the social cohesion and respecting one another. And one of the things that I love is in my neighborhood, like, all the houses look different. Like, all the houses are very unique, but they're all maintained. Like, there are people who take pride in their their lawns. And that's something that I've seen, like, so many garbage think pieces talking about, like, lawns or white supremacy and vestiges of, like, just all this fucking stupidity, or it's a way of, it's a competition between neighbors and all that. Like, I walk by a lot of the houses in my neighborhood and I'm like, man, I'm proud to live in this neighborhood with these kinds of homes. Like, this is so beautiful. When people come out to visit me, which isn't often because we're so far out here. But when they come out, because the hat, they're like, "You're gonna wear your hat? I don't want to fucking see you if you're gonna wear your hat." But when they come out here, they're like, "Oh my God, this is such an amazing place," and it's an amazing place to raise kids as well, which I think is another important part.
Yeah, and I will, it's not a slam dunk in terms of, business case one way or the other, because I do think the way we do housing in this country is not good. It's too low density. The economics don't work. Like, running all of that pipe, all of that electricity, all of that pavement to individual houses is almost exactly the same amount of material to house and support one family or support 10 families. And so what ends up happening is all of these municipalities are essentially broke. The only thing they have money for is to just do basic upkeep, but they don't have money for major upgrades. They don't have money for proper public transportation system, because they don't have the density and they don't have the cash, because those units aren't generating enough. So even a wealthy family can't generate as much tax revenue as, because everyone's like, oh, the rich people are paying for it. No, it's the other way around. The poor people in higher density areas are the ones subsidizing the rich areas. So, actually, I'll make a recommendation. There's a really interesting channel called Not Just Bikes on YouTube. And he breaks down all of the urban planning pluses and minuses. Now he's probably much more YIMBY than I am, but makes a lot of data driven points. And he also goes to all these different cities and tapes and shows you exactly what the design pros and cons are of all these different places. And American suburbs and even American cities are really haphazard. Austin is just scattershot. It is so, like, there's one block we were on the other day where there's a giant hotel being built, all these different outdoor music venues competing with noise, just kind of blasting over each other, and then just apartment buildings right there. So like, if you were living in one of those apartment buildings, during the day you're listening to major construction noise of something being built, and then at night it just transitions over to a bunch of mediocre bands just blasting each other from across the street. And so it's, so yes, there is a certain level of overhead that's required to make a city function. And when it doesn't, it's not make Austin weird, it's make Austin chaotic and illogical is what it is. Because, it had so little of that urban planning layer that it created chaos rather than something workable. There's no public transport system that works. It's just buses and things like that.
Yeah, well, I think like an example of that, I totally hear what you're saying. When we moved in to our house and we did we basically did like a gut renovation of the whole thing. And then when it came time to, look at the boiler, we heard that, we have an opportunity to do natural gas. And we were like, oh, this is fantastic. But we moved in, I think, like a month after they had repaved the road outside of our home. So because of that, we're not allowed to put a natural hookup to the natural gas line for 4 years. So here we are for 3 or 4 years. And, as much as I like it cold in the summertime, I like it warm in the wintertime. So, here I am paying out of my ass for oil when the hookup isn't very difficult. It's like maybe 20 feet. You have to run it. So that's definitely like a waste of money and, on a personal level. And then also just in general. And, something I want to say is I've been following or recommended a lot of like pro bicyclist accounts and pro mass transit, like trains and stuff like that. And the one thing that I don't know if I've ever followed Not Just Bikes before, but the one thing that I would say is that I think these guys would be a lot more successful in their
messaging.
goal, in their messaging, if they weren't fucking douchebags. Like they're all these guys, they're just like they're just utter smug douchebags talking about hey, I took the subway at midnight on a Saturday and I'm fine. And it's like, yeah, dude, well, you're not the woman that got her fucking face slashed in Queens. So it's like, and I don't like to do the one-to-one things because, there's always somebody being attacked or something like that somewhere, in a city. But there's such of like the way that they go about it, it's like shaming you for having a car rather than saying like, hey, this is why trains are great and this is why we need more of them. And I what can I do to get more people to, park the cars forever and take the train, you know?
Well, what you're describing is really at the crux of why certain things bubble to the surface and others don't, because a sensible discussion isn't going to stand out in any way. So it's usually the freaks, the weirdos, the psychopaths that have these extreme positions that float to the surface. And so, yeah, you're going to have the smug people on the left. You're going to have the, on the right, you're going to have their sanctimonious people and psychopaths. So it's very hard for because the sensible people, just by definition, don't have those wild swings in terms of mood, in terms of opinion, in terms of whatever. And so, and they're just not going to be as entertaining. And so to me, it's a shame, but it's amplified by the platforms that we use. So for not just bikes, what I liked about it, there's a series of 4 videos in particular about why the suburbs are broke that are very interesting. And so he did a series, I think they're 4 and they're like 10, 15 minutes each, but it's worth watching. And if he's not especially douchey, so I think you could probably stomach it.
Do you know what the
I don't remember his name. Yeah, and I'm not even sure he gives out his name. Maybe he does on his channel, but very interesting content and tolerable enough for me. But the other thing that I've been thinking a lot about is, and this is why libertarianism, one of the reasons, doesn't fully work for me, is the thing is that our lives have become so complicated. Like, when did you ever, when you were a young kid, think that you would have to ponder hooking up to oil or gas for heating your home? You know what I mean? Like, these are things that are complexities that are foisted on us, right? You have no choice. You want to heat your house, you have to think about those things. You want to communicate with others, you have to think about broadband, you have to think about mobile service, you have to think about all this stuff. So there's this a platter of things that has been put in front of us, services we never imagined we needed, Amazon Prime, all the stuff that never existed before, but now we're managing this bevy of services, this sort of buffet of complexity that we've created. And that is not going away anytime if you want to function in a modern society. Right. And so the thing with libertarianism is, everyone sort of on your own. The complexity is built into how our world is wired. The way we get silicone into the computers we're using, into the phones we're using, is through a global supply chain, whether we like it or not. So
titties as well.
And silicone and silicon, exactly. Yeah, they're interchangeable. I did try to run my computer on the other one. It didn't work. Not as well.
You did try bigger ones. You didn't try much bigger.
Yeah, I really tried, but my girlfriend had a problem with it at the time. So the challenge is that libertarianism is great if you can stay isolated, if you can focus on smaller communities, if you could do. But once you start looking at how the things we value and the things we need get to our doorstep, it is a much messier system. And it's a system that requires global engagement in a way that we are not able to opt out of. And I don't think the philosophy has sufficient answers for that level of complexity. And I don't think we have that for ourselves individually. Just like, like there were a bunch of guys at some point, I remember when cell phones first came out, they're like, I don't need a cell phone. What do I need this bullshit for? Right? And then another set, the next generation of guys are like, I don't need a smartphone. I'm fine with this cell phone that, because it's the same guy, but just fast forwarded 10 years or 15 years. And then now it's like, I don't need AI. What do you think? I need AI. And like, yes, you need all of those things, because why do you need them? Because everyone else has them, and they're going to have advantages in the marketplace if you don't. So how functional would you be if you couldn't communicate through digital communication, or if you weren't reachable by text, or if you weren't, didn't have Google Maps, or couldn't order an Uber? So now that, you fast forward and that guy now exists in the AI space. It's like, oh, you think, and then the next guy is going to be, oh, you think I'm going to put a chip in my head? I'm like, all of your neighbors have chips in their heads and they're doing calculations 1,000 times faster than you are. And so you now are their janitor because you didn't want a chip in there.
Well, you know who that guy is? You know who the janitor is? The guy wearing the hat. The guy wearing the wool hat and a sweater because his house is so cold. But I think you bring up a good point, because when it comes to libertarianism, and as speaking as a libertarian, there is the just day-to-day logistics. And one of the realities, and something that I've brought up on other podcasts that I've been on, is one of the things that one needs to accept, whether you're a libertarian or not, is that we all don't have the same values and we all don't have the same beliefs. So me as a libertarian, when I'm interacting with a world that is, even just directly outside of my home, that, they might be more Republican one year or Democrat one year, they're never going to be, at least in the near future, as I see it, more libertarian. So it's like, how do I, as an individual, as a libertarian with this, philosophy, how do I, deal with these people in the, in the most fruitful way, possible, without me ending up going crazier than being a guy, who has his house at 50 degrees. It's not 50 degrees. That would be super insane. But I think that is an ongoing, an ongoing discussion to have. And when it comes to city planning and stuff, I think you had posted, some stuff recently about, cars and the problem with cars. And I'd like to, talk to you more about that, because, a lot of the suburbs that we're dealing with, definitely a lot of the cities that we're dealing with, these are all things that have been constructed long before we were even here, and it's sort of like, there's sort of like some Monday morning quarterbacking as far as, what could have been done, but we're also looking at what could have been done through the lens of the technology that we have now, and having lived through decades and decades of mismanagement and fuck ups and all that. But on the subject of cars, what do you think was the biggest problem, with cars as compared to cities and stuff?
I think, yes, you make a valid point. Everything is of a time. And, in the time that you're building things, you have to consider, well, what are your best options, right? And so cars seemed like the best way to get around at a certain time. And so the biggest sort of car-centric communities first started, like the suburbs, I think were on Long Island. So they were essentially factory towns. People had to work somewhere, and so they built these cookie cutter houses everywhere, and people had to go and and then they lived in these, they had the little garage, and so everything was set up. And then a highway and freeway system started to build up to connect all these little suburbs, and strip malls started to pop up and all that. And you had a lot of space to work with. So a lot of it is just a function of having the space. And what happens at some point is there's a turning point, right? Where too many cars, too many people, not enough lanes on the highway, not enough capacity. And so then the question becomes, how do you deal with that? And so just compare and contrast how Europe started to deal with their problems. Now, their problems were a little bit different because they continued living in sort of walkable environments, whereas we were already living in, driving type suburbs, or at least a lot of people were. And so their reaction was, well, we're going to dig underground and create a subway system of some kind to connect people. What we did was we said, okay, well, we're going to add lanes to highways, mm-hmm. and which is a very finite. You were going to say something.
Oh, no, good.
Yeah. So we added lanes, but again, it's very hard to accommodate one vehicle with one person in it for the most part, who's commuting or going to run errands. So I think that at some point you do need, and we did have urban planning. That urban planning got us the suburbs. People think, oh, that's not, no one was involved in planning. No, people were planning. They said, we're going to put a community here. And they said, we're going to invest and put all these houses, and they got credit from the government for abatements to build it. And the challenge we have now is that all of the desirable areas near work districts that people want to live in, like New York, tri-state area is a great example, where all of the expensive suburbs became expensive because of their proximity to New York. And what's keeping it that way is you're not allowed to sell your house to somebody who may want to build a multifamily unit.
Mm-hmm.
And so you end up having low density protected forever because that's what the people who bought in. So it's this incumbency protection. So the libertarian solution would be let anyone sell to anyone, let anyone build anything within reason, obviously, if there's noise or whatever, and when you do the development or the disruption to other people's lives. But I think then at least you have a chance of increasing the density, and everybody wins, even incumbents. If you have a $1 million house, someone will come in and pay you $2 million for it if they can build a 10-family unit on that same property, which is very possible. So the question is, so then if we were to do that, then you have higher density transportation options. Then it starts to make sense to build subway systems. But continuing to go the way we're going, we're creating 2, maybe 3 major taxes on people. The first tax is the housing cost. The entry cost to buy a house is outrageous because now you've pushed people farther and farther out from desirable areas. They can't even afford to get into certain areas, and no one can afford to build multifamily because those neighborhoods are locked off to buyers, to builders. So that's one tax. So now you're paying that. Then there's the property tax that's associated with it. Because remember, the new buyer is subsidizing all of the old buyers because their estimates of their taxes, their assessments are based on old property values when they bought in for the most part. So they're paying way lower than the new people coming in, buying at much higher prices. So those people are now subsidizing all of the previous owners. So it's an incumbent subsidy. That's a second subsidy. The third, actually, there's probably more now that I'm thinking about it, is the car, which you're forcing everyone to buy a car. There's no other way for them to get around. There's no way for you to get your shopping done in the suburbs if you don't have a car. And so now everyone, even kids who just, are old enough to be free but aren't old enough to have a good deal on insurance, are going to have a car somehow. So some people drive uninsured or let their kids drive uninsured because they can't afford to pay double what their insurance would cost because it's an 18 or 19-year-old driver. So now you have that tax, the cost of the car, the upkeep of the car, and the insurance cost on top of that. So we've inflicted, so the illusion and the concept that's been sold into us is this is freedom. The car, you can drive anywhere, go anywhere. The open road, isn't it beautiful? The wind going through your hair. I mean, I don't have that much hair, but I know conceptually what it might feel like.
I got a lot of wind from all the cool air blowing down. That's why I wear this hat.
Yeah. So that is what is sold into us. But then there's another measure of freedom, which is, hey, wouldn't it be great to not have to get into a vehicle every time you need to go to the store and buy just a handful of groceries, and just to walk somewhere, or your kids to take a bike to school instead of having to cross a highway and you having to shepherd them to all their soccer games because they can't get anywhere by walking. And so I think that our concept of liberty is very, very broken. And I think there's different ways to come at it. And I encourage people who haven't been, I don't know to what extent your audience breaks down one way or the other, but people who've experienced the subway systems in France or in Barcelona and all these other places, they're amazing. And you feel pretty free. Now, yes, there is a layer of government that had to intervene to create this thing. but it gives you a different tier of freedom. And some would make a very strong case that that's a superior type of freedom than the subjugation of having to drive everywhere and pay all of those associated fees. Like, you can't even compare the cost of living in a European city or even New York until you consider, well, what is my transportation cost? Because like you can't, like, yeah, on the surface it looks like, oh, Sarasota, Florida is dirt cheap, but let's add all the cars and let's add all the, those costs, and then let's compare to the $150, $180 monthly subway pass or tube pass that you could get elsewhere.
Yeah. No, I think those are all great points. And one of the things that I could say is that, as I was born in Queens, and so I know what it's like to own a car, especially like as a young person. Like, I was 17 when I got my first car, thanks to my parents. So I know like what that quote unquote freedom is. But then I also know what it was like going to NYU and living in the city. And at the time when I was at NYU and when I was living in the city after that, years after that, I loved the subway. Like, I absolutely loved it. There was a time when they raised the monthly price, I think, on the subway pass. I think it was like 100. Yeah, MetroCard, like $120. I think that was like, it went up. At that time, I forget what it originally was. It was like a considerable, it went up considerably.
Yeah, it's like from 80 to 120. I don't know if there was a stop in between, but yeah, it was a lot.
Yeah, it was something like that. And then what I would do is, every time that I would swipe the card, I would mark on a piece of paper, like, what it cost. And then at one point, like 1 month, I was like, I'm beating these guys. Like, they charged me, 120. I got like over $200 of rides, out of this. And then I also know what it's like to, travel in Europe. I did a semester abroad in Madrid, and yeah, the metro there was excellent. I think the one hitch that we had in Madrid was, I forget, it was like maybe like 2 a.m. or something like that. They shut down the metro to like probably to be washed, but I think there was also as a way to get taxi cabs business as well. It's like not to, but we kind of did, we dealt with that. I mean, we didn't feel it. I mean, we were very young at the time. So, I could, without a doubt, there's just all these trade-offs. And as you're talking about the car, like, we are a 2-car household where I am paying monthly for both cars, to own it. Now we used to lease, and now we go lease to own. The insurance on cars have gone up considerably, and it's not like we've had accidents, thank God. It's just, I think there's other people fucking it up for us. That other drivers on the road.
It's a combination of things. It's them, it's inflation, it's just them wanting to profit more and being able to petition politicians they have in their pocket.
And other costs. Obviously there's the price of gasoline. Then there's another cost that I didn't realize it until I really started kind of like freelancing and driving to shoots, which is your mileage. And there are times when I put in, there's I think MapQuest is what I use, and they'll give you, like, you put in the 2 addresses and they'll tell you the mileage that are able to write off on your federal, on your income taxes. And there are times, like, just going to the city is technically costing me like $80 without, and that doesn't count the Easy Pass, So when you start adding that stuff up, like, I'm talking to you and I'm like, man, is there a way I can get rid of one of these fucking cars? Like, I know it might hinder, me and the family for a little bit, because, I'll need my car to get to gigs, but, I wonder, like, in the long run, or at least maybe in the short term, it might be a way to go. Because it's just like the bills never stop, and they just seem to keep going up and up and up.
Right. And you have no control over those things.
No,
and so
you're right.
You can't vote a lower insurance rate for the most part. You don't even know how that sausage is made. Whereas you might be able to affect, the MTA prices to some degree, because you vote for certain politicians, and sometimes they pull back on rate increases. So there is a way to exert leverage there, at least some. And so I think that we need to really rethink what liberty means. And sometimes, the analogy I would give is, in business, one of the things that we always think about is, products are complicated. Banking products are complicated. Technology products are super complicated. So your job as the designer of the product is to simplify, to absorb the complexity, and to give the consumer access to only the things that they need. Your job is to suck it up and figure out how to simplify it and show them the simplest way of accessing it possible, no matter how ugly the back end is. And so hiding the ugly back end is pretty much the strategy for individuals, for technology, and it should be for government, because if you don't, you will foist all of that complexity and all of that pressure, and worse, all of that time theft. This is the thing. So I wrote a piece years ago on the tax conspiracy, I called it. I wanted to get clicks, but it's a really good piece. If I have to compliment myself, good job, Steve. But the angle is, the tax system is broken for a very different reason than what a lot of people think. It is the single greatest theft of time in the history of mankind. And so think of so it's bad enough that it sustains an industry of worthless people. I'm not even saying lower taxes. I'm saying simplify the taxes. I'm saying there's no reason the tax code needs to be more than one typed page, maybe two for the business version of the tax code, and get us to the same level of revenue without the headache, without the social engineering, without the political games that created it in the backdrop. And so we don't think of it that way. And that's, again, a reframing that if we did, we would see it completely different, because the amount of time, they know how much you paid. All of these are giant institutions. They know how much you deposited. Your employers, most people are employed by major companies. They know exactly how much you got paid and how much got taken out of your paycheck. In Europe, they just send you a little postcard that says, is this correct? You check a box and that's done. I don't even think you have to mail anything back anymore. It's all digital. And so we should be doing the same exact thing. And it's not that their system is any less complicated. It's more complicated. But they found a way to absorb the complexity and get it down to a card, a little postcard that says, is this number correct? And essentially we could all get down to that as well. And I'm not saying we shouldn't clean up that back end. I think that back end is millions of lines of code, and somehow the thing still functions. It's like our society in general. It's like a bad program. You just realized I left the water in the other room. Can we pause for a second?
Yeah. Go run out. We're just going to pause right here, and then we'll pick right back up. Good?
Ready to go. Yeah, much better. Sorry.
Go for it. Taxes.
Yeah, so I think last I saw, there were 5 million lines in our tax code. That's like having software. It's almost like Microsoft Office. Like there are errors it still makes. Like, how you paste something in and it reformats it, and you're like, why is it reformatting? This problem has existed. I've never pasted something into Word or PowerPoint and have it come out exactly as I thought it would. That's never happened, and I've used it for decades. So how is it possible that all of these engineers, all of these people who work behind the scenes at Microsoft have never figured out a way to match the thing I pasted in to the thing that it was when I cut it or copied it? And so they could, because you're dealing with thousands of lines of legacy code, and who's going through it. Maybe someone is, maybe they're not. And that's why there's room in the marketplace for new people, because they start from a base of zero and they can start developing something clean. That's why the banking industry was so susceptible to disruption, except for the legal and regulatory layer that keeps the big banks in business. Like when I was at Citi, they were still integrating systems from a decade ago, from acquisitions from 10 years ago. So this is a never-ending nightmare. So our tax code is exactly that. And so your job as a company, your job as a government, is to rescue people from the bullshit that exists, but instead we're exposing it all. So now we're managing all of these bullshit tax nuances and write-offs, and everyone becomes a criminal in that world because it's really just a function of enforcement. Then it's like what they're doing to Trump. Everything he's doing that he's been found guilty of, he's probably guilty of, but they've chosen not to enforce it before, and they're choosing to enforce it now. And so enforcement is the choice, because everything on the books is technically illegal. So they could find something, you as a freelancer, especially with all your write-offs and all your mileage calculations, they can find a lot of chinks in your armor. If they want.
Please don't find any chinks. I have no chinks. Okay. There are no chinks in this household.
I heard there's one under that hat.
There's one. I have one chink living under this hat. Very quiet.
Anyway, so you get my point. I don't want to beat it into the ground.
No. I get it. Like it's one of the seen and the unseen costs, right? That we have here, and where I thought you were going with the the time, like the stealing of time. That's very much when it comes to cars too.
It's another thing to maintain, another thing to manage. Yeah. It's like, oh, I need to go re-register at a new state. Oh, I need to go get inspected. Oh, I need to go. It's a nonstop bevy, and it gives you. So this is a thing. So conceptually, this is how I think about it. I think it'll be helpful for people to think about life this way in a lot of cases. It's another lever to manage. So think of life as a graphic equalizer, right? So the simplest graphic equalizer would have just three things. There's treble, mid-range, and bass, right? And you can adjust the sound. Now, but that's not a fine adjustment, right? So then you can get a 10-band graphic equalizer, or 12-band, or 30-band, or whatever. And then you're into professional studio equipment. And now you can, it's infinity how you could adjust the audio. But every lever that you add is a lever you have to manage. And the worst kinds of levers are ones that someone else installs for you. And so I'll give you an example. Like when all this wokeness stuff started happening, and really accelerated during the pandemic, what corporations did is they installed a new lever. And a lot of people, again, don't think of it this way, but I think it's an interesting way of framing it. So now they installed a lever that says, hey, there's a new category of infractions that we can get to fire you with, which is you can misgender somebody, you can do, like whatever all the sort of woke kind of BS is. And so now that's not to say that they will, because if you're a super valuable employee and you have great connections within the company or someone protecting you at the executive level, you might be fine even if you commit one of those infractions. But the lever is always there. And when they want to get rid of you, they can turn that lever all the way down and you're out the door. And so whenever government or life imposes a new thing. A car is a lever. This is a thing now you have to manage. So they've added a few different levers. Now there's an insurance part of it. There's the fuel part of it. There's the maintenance. There's the car itself. And so now you're managing a set of levers, but managing them is making your life more complicated. Now you're at studio level complexity. Whereas before you were like, hey, I just want to fine tune my sound a little bit and, maybe get a little bit more treble in my audio. Now it's like, oh, now I have to be a studio engineer. Now I have to figure out how to work this massive 500 band equalizer that now exists in my life of every single new relationship that I have to manage and every new device. And that's one of the reasons I remember when I had an iPad for a very short period, because I had a client that required it for their app. And I could not wait to get rid of it, because another thing I have to charge, another thing I have to update apps, another thing I'm like, now I have a baby, an electronic baby that I never use.
Tamagotchi? Is that what
it's like my little Tamagotchi, where I have to charge it. I have to nurture it. Oh, right. Your apps are old. I need to fix them. And so it's this useless thing. And I was very conscious of it, but I never put it together until later, where it's like, oh, that's why I got rid of it, because they've added a piece, something complex into my life that I don't want there. And now is an opportunity to simplify. And so I think that, and that was a lever that I could fully control. The car, you can't fully control. I don't know that maybe you can get rid of one of your cars, but it's going to be painful.
Yeah, and one of the things, one lever that I never saw coming. So I had my one car at one point. It was the older car. If you were using the air conditioner, there's like 4 levels, and level 1 and level 2, you were good. But you know me, I like to be very cool. So I would try to, put it on 3 or 4, and I would put it on 3 or 4, and you would hear like the whole dashboard would just kind of like rock. It was terrible. Eventually I brought it in to get checked out, and the guy tells me, yeah, well, you had a little critter living inside your car. So a little animal of some sort, we don't know what it was, had built a nest in under the dashboard, and it had basically thrown whatever balance was off balance. So they took him out, they removed it, and he said, it may go back, it may not, because now it's an internal balance thing. So I think now we've been like a couple of months out from getting from evicting this fucker. I think level 3 is all right, but I'm still worried about going to level 4 because that sound is there. And it's like, yeah, yet another reason, why the car sucks. The one example that I bring up though, with a lot of these douchebag anti-car guys, and these are all the douchebags again, like you're speaking very, there's a reason why you're here again, Steve Faktor.
I'm honored, and if I get a third date, I'm expecting,
that's yeah. You're gonna see what's under the
hats
hat.
come off.
Hats come off, baby. The one thing that I bring up to these guys is, the reality of like during the pandemic, when I was living in Brooklyn, and subways were shut down, and there was a fucking airborne disease killing people, and I had a newborn, I was very happy to have my car because I could get out. And during that time, like driving out to my parents in Queens, what would normally take at least 45 minutes, or now like an hour and 15, hour and a half, we were getting there in 20 minutes because there's nobody on the road.
Yeah.
So it was like, wow, perfect scenario to be a driver. The world has to be, undergoing a pandemic. But I think too, it's sort of like, during that time, and maybe that's a once in a lifetime situation. I hope it's a once in a lifetime happening. Really happy that I had the car. And now when things have kind of gone back to normal, in spite of everybody, claiming to have the long COVID and whatever new strain is coming out, during that time, I was happy to have it. So.
Yeah. It's, I think one of the biggest impediments, we talk about this in different contexts, but it's worth bringing into this one, which is we're increasingly, and maybe we always have, lived in a low trust society. And when you look at Europe and you look at the troubles they're having integrating all these immigrant and migrant populations, with them, it's very easy to look at what they have and say, hey, if you're Swedish and you take in a bunch of, Moroccans or other, people from these Muslim countries, there's nothing they can do, and there's nothing you can do to them to make them Swedish, right? Because Sweden is as much a nationality and ethnicity as it is a country. Mm-hmm. And so that makes integration very hard, because among the Swedes, trust levels are very high, right? So that's why they feel comfortable offloading so much. I'm not saying Sweden in particular, any European country taken in isolation. They feel very comfortable offloading these decisions and maybe assigning powers to government that we would feel uncomfortable with, because they have such a high level of trust. It's like, hey, these are other people just like us. But when you introduce not like us, that can, if you have a facility for integrating people, then you can reach those higher trust levels again. But when you don't, you can't. And so in the US, it's always been a melting pot type of society. And so, but our superpower has been this ability to assimilate lots of people from lots of places. Not all people can be assimilated as easily, but I would say we can do it better than most, only because America, at least at this point, is a country of ideas and ideals, not one of ethnicities, even though there are some people that would like to make it that. But one of the downsides is that you don't have that same cohesion as you do in individual communities. And that's why you have a Chinatown virtually in every single city in the world, because the Chinese are, keep it play close to the vest. They establish these high trust communities. You can't get into them. They don't want you in them. And they manage it like a mini version of what they're comfortable with, whatever that is, and so you see versions of that in other places, but over time in the US, it sort of starts to dissipate. You had these Russian communities in Brooklyn, you had the Italians, and at some point they moved out to the suburbs and sort of like filtered into the ether of suburban life. We now have the illusion of community online because we're bringing all these disparate people together in these places like, X or all these different, Facebook, and immediately seeing the conflict, because some of the things they believe and the things that they want to say to each other are not meant for the ears of other people who are not from that community. Mm-hmm. And so, but when exposed to it, it is shocking because you're like, oh my God. And now you're creating conflict all the time, because now you've exposed how little trust there is, because you see what some people are willing to say about you behind your back to your face, so to speak.
Well, I have to say, my I wrote a little piece that ran on 4th of July about what appreciation of the United States, and I'm the son of an immigrant. And one of the things that I said is my favorite immigrants are the ones who become Americans. And thank God my immigrant dad became an American, because that's one less daddy issue that I have. I got to say, the people who I get along with, some of my favorite Americans are refugees from Ukraine.
Immigrants from Ukraine,
which is you, which is my good friend Boris Hyken, who I think you
I know Boris. I met
before. And I don't necessarily get along. I maybe it's because I haven't met that many refugees from other parts, but I was at Boris's wedding some years back. Actually, he got married right at the beginning of the of COVID. Like he was and he and his wife, they went to Asia for their honeymoon while COVID was hitting. So it was amazing. And Boris, who I've worked with a lot as a comedian, and we've written stuff together and all that. Like his family's like big fans. So he's, if anything, if my career doesn't take off anywhere, I know that there's this coalition of Ukrainian Jews who fucking, who really love the work that I've done. But yeah, with that, one of the it is interesting to see when these cultures collide. For example, recently there's been the thing with Armenians in Los Angeles in regards to teachings of, I guess, LGBT inclusive materials in schools. Conservative. Yeah, and the Armenians don't play that. And I have a good friend who I grew up with who's Armenian. And he's like, yeah, we're animals. We're fucking savages. What do you it's not gonna work. He's got some of the most amazing stories. He told me this one story about the amount of fist fights he's had with his father-in-law. He's had to fist fight his father-in-law. And it's all right, because you think of here's a small group of immigrants. They must be all about everybody who's everybody who's a minority and all that. And it's like no, when values bump heads, you're gonna have guys who sometimes literally throw headbutts.
Well, it's a form of rite of passage in those cultures. And I'm in a culture where yelling and shouting does not necessarily mean that you don't love each other. It just means that is how you communicate and how you sort things through. But if I were to transplant that attitude into another setting, I am the biggest demon on earth, because no one can interact that way, especially not the new fragile generation. They'll just start crying.
Yeah. I realized something about myself. I don't know if it's necessarily like a cultural thing, but I'm like, I could be a real pain in the ass to like work with if things aren't going well. Like if my vision is not being realized, it could be a real pain in the ass. Like when things are going well, like I'm a happy boy and, you know, I love working, but I have a really hard time like not saying something. And that's, you know, that's come about as an employer and also as an employee. And it's like a touch. I kind of had, there's this balance where it's like the successes that I've had have been in part because I speak up and I say what I'm thinking and I point stuff out like, this isn't right. But then I wonder how many people are like, oh God, that fucking guy. Like, I don't know if I'm gonna work with that guy again. You know?
Most successful people can be very harsh, and you can see even in retrospect how they got that way. You just reminded me of a story. Who's the guy who was the lead singer of Skid Row? Do you remember his name?
Sebastian
Bach. Okay. So a friend of mine, he gets free tickets to all these different events. And I say no to 70% of them because it's Sebastian Bach is the guy who's giving away.
Not Johann Sebastian Bach.
Right. It's the other Sebastian Bach. And so that's kind of the tier of free concerts that he gets. And there is stuff I like in that tier. But anyway, so he convinced me to go to see Sebastian Bach, even though I know maybe 3 songs from Skid Row, but he convinced me because it was walking distance from my old apartment in Manhattan. So
there you go. No car needed,
no car, just
no
walked
transport.
over.
Right.
And so I went there, and sometime during the show, I don't know, maybe 7 or 10 songs in, something went wrong with the audio equipment, and the mic dropped, and just it sound wasn't working. Sebastian Bach went crazy. He started yelling at the mixing guy. He started giving them like very specific, detailed orders, like not just like, hey, fix this. It was like check this, do that, check the other thing. And all of a sudden, this guy that you would take for granted as a washed up has-been, or a guy who gives away free tickets to guys who live 10 blocks away. But all of a sudden, you see the motor that exists inside this guy and why he got to the heights that he got. Because, you know, the bottom line is, just if you know somebody's name, there is something in them, a motor or something that is beyond what 99% of the people, maybe 99.9% of the people in your life have. And this guy, in that brief moment, revealed to me an explanation of why he ever got to those heights and why he still has some fan base that wants to see him perform, because there is a motor there. And so all of these people, even the ones that, you know, you might think have fallen from grace, even if you make a list of the 3 least talented celebrities, the fact that you could put them on a list and know their names, I guarantee you there's something about them that is impressive and has that motor in them.
Right on. Well, everybody, if you're watching this, I hope that both myself and Steve Faktor are on your list of Sebastian Bachs. We are the Sebastian Bachs of 2024, God willing. Steve, man, thank you so much for hanging with me today. So you mentioned your tax conspiracy article. I'd love to link
check
to
that out. And follow me, Steve Faktor, on most platforms. It might be Idea Factory on X. I have Steve Faktor, but I don't use it. But find me. You know, the Googs still work. Maybe not for important things, but for finding me, you'll still find me.